Katara leaned listlessly in Appa's saddle, eyes trailing over the exact same setting she'd been staring at for nearly 2 days now. Appa was exhausted, feet trailing the icy waters as Aang whispered encouragement from the beast's head. "Come on, do the thing." Sokka was poking at Zuko with his boomerang, and the firebender rolled his eyes and didn't move. He was taking up the majority of the saddle, sprawled out, shirtless, to soak in as much of the weak northern sunlight as possible. Katara, who would occasionally shiver even her well-insulated parka, would have been amazed that he wasn't turning blue if it wasn't for the thing keeping him warm. She watched with idle, amused contentness as her brother continued to pester the firebender until Zuko finally either got too cold or annoyed and relented. The boy took in a single deep breath, and when he exhaled, the air in the bubble around them got noticeably warmer, like stepping into a sauna in the middle of winter. On the exhale, sparks flew from his mouth, and he penally spat them at Sokka, who loudly complained and contorted to avoid them, but essentially reacted the same as when Katara splashed him with her bending. The girl felt a blossom of joy and of hope flush through her at the level of trust displayed. Not just on Sokka's part, but for knowing that the flames wielded by Zuko would cause him no harm, but on Zuko's as well. He wasn't afraid to use his bending for simple, petty pranks to annoy Sokka. The boy had been so tense when he first joined, so scared. She hadn't trusted him, true, but he'd acted so paranoid that it had been easy to be suspicious of him. Still, she could see that he had been so careful, weighing each action and word, as though the wrong one would have devastating results. Who knew? With Jet, maybe it would have. She was glad to see him more comfortable now, teasing Sokka and complaining about how long it was taking to find the Northern Water Tribe. Momo had jumped off of Aang's shoulder to curl up on the teen's chest, cuddling on the warm spot. Zuko rolled his eyes but obliged the lemur much more readily than he had Sokka, taking another deep breath and letting out another wave of heat. He'd been getting a little stronger with his bending, but still could do nothing more than manipulate a small torch, make sparks, and whatever this was. Sokka sighed in contentness as warmth flooded them. Okay, list of Fire Nation things that are actually kinda good. And that's why the trust warmed Katara. She spoke of hope for a world after the Fire Nation had been defeated, but had never considered what part the Fire Nation would play in that world. If the people were less like Zhao and more like Zuko, well, maybe there was a true hope for a new world after all. 1. That, whatever it is, instant sauna? It's called Breath of Fire, Zuko said, sounding simultaneously content and superior. Fine. 2. Zuko! Aang added cheerfully, and Sokka paused for a moment before inclining his head as though to say fair. Zuko was scowling again, but his cheeks were bright red, and Katara couldn't help but laugh. He turned the scowl on her, but it was quickly losing effect on her. 3. Those dumplings and the roasted nuts. Pretty much the whole fire festival, Katara added, even the whole fire show was cool. Would have been better if Aang hadn't jumped in, Zuko grumbled, and Katara had to fight down another laugh. Sokka didn't bother. As always, Zuko jumped when he realized he kinda sorta told a joke. Tui-in-law, how had she been intimidated by this kid? Suddenly, Aang yelled, forcing up at a sharp angle at a jagged sheet of ice shot from the ocean in front of the bison. Sokka, Katara, and Zuko yelled out in surprise, clutching desperately to the saddle as a mini iceberg emerged from the sea and tried their hardest to capsize the flying beast. Zuko was holding on with one hand and the other had drawn his sword, because of course he did. What did he expect to do, stab the ice? As it was, the boy wasn't able to keep his one-handed grip when one patch of ice got too close and sent the bison careening across the ocean like a skipped rock. Katara screamed as she watched her friend go flying overboard, itching to bend him to safety but unable to move a hand lest she face the same fate. Within moments, Appa stopped with a splash, and cold ice encircled and trapped the bison. Katara was moving instantly, so focused on finding a mop of unruly dark hair among the icy dark waters that she did notice the long ships full of men, and the blues and whites of a water tribe floating purposely their way. At least she didn't until a column of ice rose from the water with a struggling Zuko in tow, without her lifting her finger. "They're waterbenders," she said in wonder. "We've found the water tribe." Sokka, Aang, and her shared a large, wondrous grin. Zuko proceeded to try and stab at the ice. It was surprisingly effective, that, or he had been melting it, for what he soon was able to pull himself free and jump from the pillow to Appa's back. He was shivering violently, alarmingly. His torso was covered in a thin layer of constantly melting and freezing seawater, and his lips were tinged blue. Katara immediately moved, Sokka beside her, cuddling up to the boy so that his pale, exposed skin was covered in the warmth of their coats. Zuko squirmed, uncomfortable with hugs still, though she, Sokka, and Aang had been working on that for weeks now. After a moment, however, the desire for heat had worn out, and she was gratified to feel him relax between them. Score 1 for team hugs. Zuko let out a shuddering breath, then took in a purposeful one. By the time he exhaled, water steamed off of him as his lips and cheeks regained a more natural color. The water tribe was upon them. Katara smiled wildly, brightly. They had made it. Through trials and tribulations and dangers, they had kept going. Now they were here, she and Aang could finally learn real waterbending. They would learn the waterbending that was capable of filling a flying bison. She had never felt more hopeful. Then one of the tribemen shouted, "Firebender!" and Zuko was cast off of Appa by a cannonball of ice. Her smile fell. Zuko glared as he once more used his breath of fire, uncaring that one of the benders pointedly made the ice trapping him even stronger. The water tribe peasants could do what they wanted. If he wasn't going to get a shirt, he would do what he had to do in order to keep frostbite at bay. If he focused on that, he could ignore that he was trapped. Ignore the voice shouting, "Not again, not again, not again, not again." Sokka, Katara, and Aang were all loudly protesting his treatment, which helped a little bit. The waterbenders didn't seem to be listening to them, though, not even the Avatar, and instead stoically led them into the Ice City. Zuko could only hope that was because they didn't want to speak for their chief, rather than this was their blatant disregard of visitors was cultural. He doubted it was a water tribe thing based on Sokka and Katara, but they were from the South Pole, and from their stories of it, the North Pole seemed to be vastly different. Katara and Sokka spoke of single-family huts, legends told around a fire with homemade and well-cared-for goods. They spoke of a small community that was almost like an extended family, with the chief's family no better off than any others as they shared what they had. This was a palace, a gorgeous, sprawling city formed in white and blue and crystal. There was advanced architecture, a castle, decorated and fortified walls that shone in the weak northern sun. It would have been beautiful if he hadn't been shivering and tied up and scared. The three others were not cold and bound and afraid. They were free to gape at the stunning scene, the heat of even Katara's anger baffled by wonder. Zuko shuddered as the opening of the gates created an additional gust of wind and allowed another burst of life-saving breath of fire. The waterbenders not involved with opening the gate glared at him, but he simply glared back even fiercer. That was the only benefit of the scar. He could look more intimidating than the water tribe warriors without even trying. He was momentarily distracted by the intricate lowering of the inner gate, but his fury returned several times over as a small boat he was attached to slid smoothly along the canals, and townspeople gaped like there was some kind of festival procession. Part of that could have been Aang, and more likely the giant flying bison, but he was too angry to care. The only one who didn't openly stare was a young girl in a rich purple coat, sailing on an ornately decorated boat and staring demurely ahead. Zuko's guard stiffened as the boat slid past, only relaxing when he was well out of Zuko's range. Someone important then, likely royalty or whatever the water tribe equivalent was. Behind him, Zuko could distinctly hear the sounds of Sokka making to fool himself as the royalty passed Appa. The Fire Nation team wished even more in that moment that his hands were free, if only so that he could facepalm. A woman emerged from one of the grand buildings and tried to ferry Aang, Katara, and Sokka to some rooms to rest. but the three of them seemed to finally remember that the resident firebender was freezing and immobile and terrified, a prisoner, and was staunchly refusing to leave his side. The woman tried to protest, but when Sokka insisted, she acquiesced with surprising speed. Zuko would be lying if he to say he wasn't relieved. They made them wait outside an impressive ice building for several minutes, ice growing thicker and thicker around Zuko as the benders responded to his breath of fire, but he was starting to have trouble feeling his fingertips, so he wasn't about to stop. Katara was looking like she was about seconds away from scolding the benders again, while Aang gripped his staff nervously and Sokka complained loudly about the waiting. Zuko wasn't surprised, though. They were likely calling the leaders of the village to the room, waiting for them to arrive so they could make an imposing scene. The boy breathed out another lick of fire. He tried to stave off the feeling of the ice against his bare skin, the cold burning just as painfully as fire. He tried to ignore that he could soon be facing the face of another war council. If he went out this time, it wouldn't be on his knees. He would make sure of that. Zuko was starting to lose feeling in his bound toes by the time that the council had finally all arrived. The doors of the ornate building opened, and with a move of the waterbender's hand, the firebender's ice block slid through the doors to a huge chamber with a roaring waterfall along the back wall. 4 men sat on a raised platform in front of the waterfall, and a single man standing in front of them all at the center. In the Fire Nation, the Fire Lord, the most powerful person, sat on their raised throne in all meetings. They sat even when others stood as the mark of their authority and nobility. Zuko had the feeling that things were different here, and that the man still on his feet was the true leader. The benders who brought Zuko into the room knelt, bending the ice in such a way that he did as well. Zuko immediately snarled, struggling against the bounds and contorting his back to remain as upright as possible despite the restricting bindings. Not on his knees. The leader, Chief, scowled, but made a gesture that had the men rising to their feet fluidly. The man's eyes ran over the group of 4, clearly debating whether he should address the Avatar or the matter of the prisoner first. Luckily, Sokka seemed to be raised with no concept of respectful authority as he stepped forward. Hey, Chief. Greetings from the Avatar and the Southern Water Tribe. Is there any chance you could, not turn our friend into a fire sickle, please? The chief scowled harder at Sokka before inclining his head respectfully to Aang. Avatar, I welcome you to our tribe. I also welcome the members of our sister tribe. It has been too long since we had contact with our kin, and I am overjoyed to welcome you two as companions of the Avatar as a fellow water tribesman. He did not seem overjoyed. However, I will not allow the enemy into my village. We will deal with the prisoner as we see fit. You are welcome to hear our decree, but you do not have the voices on this council. But that's not fair! Katara shouted, pure spirit and relentless determination. You can't do that! Sokka protested. Zuko isn't your enemy! Aang added. Zuko said nothing, his vision splotching, going black as his friends spoke up in a war council they were told to stay silent in. His breath came out in heavy, frantic gasps that clouded in front of him as the cold room. He barely had the argument between his friends and the chief instead of focusing his breath. When he did come up with enough clarity to understand the words behind the noise floating around the room, it was to hear the chief. Have cells in the glaciers. In defense of the Avatar, I suppose we will not kill him outright, but he will be kept there secure. Aang was still arguing, and Zuko let out a shuddering breath before admitting, Sokka, I will burn this place to the ground on top of me before I allow them to lock me up. Yeah, buddy, but how about you don't say that loud enough for the nice waterbenders to hear? Zuko barely heard, only the chief's words occasionally permitting the terror. The need to fight had caused a dull rush in his ears. You will abide by our rules, if you wish, for Master Pakku to teach you waterbending. And that was a thing. It was a thing he recognized. It was an odd, unfamiliar name on a crest letter in familiar calligraphy on paper stained with tea. Barely thinking, mind awash of not again, not again, not again, and never give up without a fight, he found himself yelling out, Waterbending Master Pakku, I challenge you to a game of Pai Sho.